We are here with Baen senior editors Tony Weisskopf and Jim Mentz, answering questions you, our readers and fans, have left for us on social media. So, Jim, Tony, let's take it away, shall we?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
First up, from Robert Coleman on Twitter. Although it may be obvious to many, I'd love to hear you describe what an editor's job is, both in the general sense and in your own specific responsibilities at Baen.
Yeah. How long do we have?
Yeah, right. We'll do the quick and dirty. I'm the guy who was the wandering minstrel before coming to the home ship on Baen, so I'll talk a little bit more about general, especially in the sense that if you're working at one of the mid to larger publishing companies, the editor's primary role there is advocate, because you're dealing with a company with hundreds or thousands of employees, and you're going to probably be the only person there who's read the book. And you need to go to the editorial board and explain it to them and get them on board. Then you need to go to the sales force and get them behind it. Then you need to go to the publicity department and get them behind it. And then you got to go to the marketing. And you try and get to know the personnel of the company to see if there actually may be a genre fan in there somewhere you can tap into to read and back up what you're saying about books and things like that. And then, of course, there's all the fiddly bits. In the end, they're the shepherd for the book. Advocate first, especially at a big publisher, but then after that, it's being the shepherd. You're guiding it through the entire process. Not just developing it when working with the author and keeping them informed, but making sure, reviewing the copy, reviewing everything that's going out there to the public so that the vision you had for the book, the vision you and the author share for the book is what's going out to the main audience at the end. And all the things that can go wrong in between.
Yeah, and it's not what you would necessarily think of an editor doing, but it's actually the editor's most important job at those large traditional publishers. We at Baen are smaller and leaner, and we tend to work. We don't have to work through layers and layers of corporate colleagues to help out with our book. So my day-to-day does involve reading manuscripts that we haven't bought yet, that have been recommended by Gray Reinhardt, our Slush Master General, or that come in from agents, or that are recommended by our existing authors. I also read manuscripts that we've already have contracts for. And work with the authors if we see anything that we see as a suggestion for improvement. All of the editors here at Baen do that. So it's not just me and Jim, but there's a team of us who work with all the authors.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. And again, it varies by company in the sense that it's not often, actually, that you have a publisher who is actually the primary editor for a company.
Right.
I worked at Tor Books. Tom Doherty, he had great editorial sense, but you'd only pull him in for the big guns. He wasn't reading everything by any stretch.
Right.
And honestly, Tony's the hardest working editor at Baen. That's what she's got us for. And when I talk about all the other things an editor has to do at Baen, because we're a small shop, there's all the other hats we also all wear. Now, Tony, it's the having to deal with all the big stuff because she's the publisher. For us, I have to also deal with production stuff. And honestly, the number one thing I should be doing at all times, but I like being an editor too much, is the subsidiary rights.
Right. Right. So,
and other things like that.
In terms of working with an author and working with a manuscript, the senior editors, we tend to assign copy editors for working with the fiddly bits, right? Working on just line to line improvement on a manuscript if that's an input that the author needs. So that I think tends to be more of what people think of when they think editing,
Right.
But that's actually just really the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, we pay freelancers to worry about proofreading and copy editing.
We manage our freelancers.
Yeah, well, that too. Yeah, we work in
Right,
tandem. We get their work and
yeah,
review what they've
yeah,
done to
yeah,
make sure they've caught it.
Yeah.
When we're doing an edit, while we certainly mark things, when you approach a work as an editor or as a copy editor or as a proofreader,
Yeah.
you need to be in different mindsets for each of them.
Absolutely.
And as a developmental editor, senior editor, whatever, acquisitions editor, insert your term here,
Right.
you have a much more forest view than, or at least you should. You're going to spot some of the trees that need pruning, trimming, whatever, but you're not doing that line by line, correct everything. And copy edits are kind of in between that, and then proofreaders are just checking the I's and T's and need to like almost not see the forest at all.
And we try not to add too much fertilizer.
Right.
So, yeah, okay. So, next question.
This comes from Sue Phillips on Facebook.
Hey, Sue.
Hey, so
What duties do the senior editors perform that the more junior ones do not?
Well,
the seniors have to do homecoming planning,
yes.
and the juniors get to just go to the prom.
I have to say, there's not a lot of differentiation, and again, that's very different from the way that other publishing houses do it. Other publishing houses, the senior editors will work with the most established and biggest earners. But at Baen, that's not how we divide the jobs, because we are all science fiction readers and science fiction fans here. I would say acquisitions, right? The ability to actually make the buy or not buy decision is left to the senior editors. Although we absolutely listen to the junior editors and their enthusiasms and people they recommend. We don't say yes to everything. Sean, I'm looking at you, but but that's really the differentiation.
Yeah. And in some ways, there are general parallels there in that, the senior editorial staff at a big place will be the advisory board looking at what juniors might bring.
Right.
And in general, junior staffers are dealing more with the lower level scut work BS, and the senior people are dealing with the high level scut work BS. But both of them have it'd be nice if I could sit around just reading all day. I would love that.
Yes.
If that's what you want to do with your life, you are never ever going to want to work as an editor in publishing.
Right.
Because that's what you do with all your free time, which you now do as your pleasure. It now becomes work.
Yeah.
Not that it's bad work to do, but once you're in the sausage factory, you can never love sausage quite as much.
We hope.
And when you find the works that make you love it.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, absolutely.
And that actually helps in that. We'll talk about that more.
Yeah, it really does. Okay.
From Anna Cassasent on Facebook. What is the one grammatical mistake you most dislike?
Oh, there are so many. Okay, there are so many. But I will say my current pet peeve is the way that voice to text software punctuates dialogue. Okay, I'm gonna say if you use voice to text software, that's fine. You do you, but you must go through and correct their grammar because it's wrong. And it's very difficult to, as you're talking, insert the correct grammar. So just learn how to do it properly, and when you make that editorial pass, please fix it. Okay, there we go.
In terms of my biggest grammatical problem is the incorrect usage of the future past perfect tense.
Oh, man.
No, I'm kidding. Honestly, I'm going to dodge the question because while I have my own grammatical errors, I overcommatize a lot. But really, as an editor, it's the pet peeves. Like, do you hate first person? Do you hate more general approaches? I'm not saying I hate first person. I'm just saying it's usually not a question of some little grammar thing. It's how people think it's genre. Therefore, the name should all be just consonants and apostrophes. And the answer is no. There should never be an apostrophe in something's name. Don't send me that. That's the kind of stuff you really wanted to hear, not I don't like the misuse of commas.
Although present tense is not.
But
present tense is not for novels.
Yes.
It's not
It's
for
not.
novels.
It is not for novels.
And yes, I have made someone rewrite a novel that was submitted in the present tense and made them rewrite it in the proper tense. So, yeah.
And yet, I've also published at a different house. I acquired something that was in first person, second person, third, past and present, and don't ever do that. It was the exception, and it should never be done again.
Right. So, there we go.
From Donald Mark Haynes on Facebook. What are some elements of a first sentence hook you like to see?
All right, so I have selected 2 books for their first sentence hooks, and I know that Jim is going to want to do this one. So,
on one otherwise normal Tuesday evening, I had the chance to live the American dream.
Read the second sentence.
Oh, well. But that's just the teaser.
That is the teaser, yeah.
And that's not a bad way to go. I was able to throw my incompetent jackass of a boss from a 14th story window. Tor used to be on the 14th floor of the Flatiron. I'm just saying.
So, I'm pretty sure that's entirely coincidence. But so the first line of Monster Hunter International is a great example of that, right? It's not a first sentence hook; it's a first paragraph hook. And I have to say, in science fiction and urban fantasy and fantasy in general, it's very hard to do everything that you need to get done in a first sentence. But you can get everything you need to get done in a first paragraph.
Yeah.
And so, all right, so this is a science fiction novel, Agent of Change. And their first sentence is, the man who was not Terrence O'Grady had come quietly. So
that's very Highline-esque. Saying a lot in what you don't say in that sentence.
It absolutely is. So what both of those things do is raise a question in the reader's minds. It's like, well, why is he not Terrence O'Grady? Why did he throw his boss out the window? And it gives you that I have to find out what happens next, right? It sets up that well, that's interesting, and makes it impossible not to keep on reading. Now, in science fiction and fantasy, unlike chick lit or mainstream fiction or even mysteries that are contemporary, you have to do a bunch of other things on that first page. You have to establish the time, you have to establish the tech level, you have to establish your viewpoint, you have to establish I don't know what else, genre really quickly.
Yes.
All of that has to happen within like the first 50 words.
Yeah.
But it can be done, right? It can be done.
And even take that step back for all the writers out there who want to know about those first hook sentences and stuff. It's good to be concerned about those kind of things. But as an editor, when you're approaching a manuscript, you have hope in your heart and no in your pen. The biggest thing about first sentences and first paragraphs and first pages is don't give me a no. Don't
Right.
throw me out of the book.
Right.
Don't do something to shock and surprise that's going to violate the break the fourth wall for some reason
Yeah.
and make me step away from your manuscript, because we get a lot of stuff. We look at a lot of stuff and we want to find the good stuff and we want to find the book that makes us not want to go home even though it's time to go home. But there's hope in our heart and no in our pen, and it's to that first no, and then we move to the next thing.
And the fact is, most novels don't start off with a hooky first sentence, right? Most novels start off with a fairly innocuous first sentence, and it's that first page where they develop it. So you don't need that
Right.
hooky first sentence.
Right.
And
That
if
might
you-
be a little more useful for short fiction.
Right. But if you whiff it, it's going to be a no.
Exactly. Right. So don't overthink it.
Don't overthink it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
don't overdo it.
Yeah.
From David Tatum, also on Facebook. As an editor, how do you handle it when new developments and discoveries in technology, astronomy, or similar fields significantly alter something fundamental in an accepted story or book?
Well, first we scream and we rail against the fates, and then we say, "Oh, that's really cool! I'm so glad that advancement has happened."
Was that peer reviewed?
First we check. So the answer is sometimes yes. The author, usually the author who will notice this, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be the editorial
Yeah,
side.
especially
Necessary.
at Baen, because as you probably noticed, our list is people who know their shit first, whether it's writing the military, whether it's writing stuff happening with space exploration. Our NASA scientists, our military vets, our military historians tend to be a hell of a lot more up on the stuff than we are, and they're the ones who are going to spot it and acquire it. And of course, the real answer to the direct question is it depends. I mean,
Right.
if it's a story that's been accepted, we think, oh, please, dear God, do we have enough time in the production to actually account for this?
Right.
If it's, we have page proofs, it's the, can we add it afterward? Maybe. If
Yeah.
it's that significant and
Yeah.
that foundational.
Yeah.
And the big picture version of this is, Hal Clement, who is the godfather, is the godfather of world building science fiction, scientifically plausible, strange alien environments, is embarrassed by his early novels, but they're absolute touchstones. You know, the Oblong Planet, is that in Mission of Gravity or Condition Critical, and where the science is so wrong, but at the time it was the cutting edge theories, and he knew them as a physicist, taught physics and the rest.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, it just does. Yeah.
And it's cool we live in a world where it does.
Yeah.
From Daniel Goldman, we have 2 questions.
Okay.
First, how do you manage editing sex scenes? And second, what is the most difficult aspect with well-established authors, and how do you tell them they sometimes have to kill their darlings?
All right, so I'll let Jim field the sex scenes question.
Okay, so first it is, we got to make sure there's enough staff in the office for proper role play, so we can make sure that,
Yes.
I'm kidding,
Yes.
you do not do
No,
that.
We do not do that. No.
For me, if it makes me want to reach for my cigarettes, which I haven't smoked in 30 years, I know it's a good scene. It really depends. I mean, it can't. It depends on the work, and it depends on what what your vision is for it, and what the author's for it. I mean, if you're thinking this is an okay book for 12 plus, as much science fiction and fantasy publishing in the adult market is, and yet that scene really sticks out a sore thumb, maybe you have to approach it to how do we tone it down, or you just leave it as is. I mean, it really depends on what the book is, what the author is, how it's handled, and it's treated like any other scene, actually.
Yeah, I think it's like a fight scene. Really.
Right.
Is it necessary to the plot? Does
Right.
Does it
Develop
does
characters.
it develop character? Is it necessary to world building? Does it go on too long? Right.
And does it throw the person out of the book or not?
Right.
Does it
Right. Yeah.
violate second belief, as
Yeah.
Tolkien
Yeah.
says?
Yeah, so just another scene. In terms of working with well-established authors, I think the question is really, do well-established authors accept editorial input? And the fact is, for our people, they are the ones most likely to accept editorial input. So it's never fun, right? It's never fun to say, I think this 40,000 word section is not going to work. So
I'm sorry you had this great research, you couldn't figure out how to actually work into the plot, but...
Or you needed to write this to get to where you needed to be. But really, they are the ones who are most likely to go.
See,
well, darn.
if you're
and then
Tony,
do
you
it.
say to Larry, make this not suck.
All right,
if
this is a story that he tells. I don't
Yes.
remember this,
Yes.
but apparently from our production side, Joy, who has to transcribe my editorial remarks, says, "Oh yeah, no, you do that." So there was a scene, I guess, on an early manuscript where a paragraph where I wrote, "This is bad. Make it not suck." And he did. This is not something I would do with every author. Okay.
Where the flip side is, if you're working with David Weber,
Right.
you need to layer your approach, because David's first answer is always no.
Always no.
And the reason isn't because he thinks it's his precious darling, it's that as soon as you say it, he's thinking of the 20 other problems you're
Yes.
creating by mentioning this.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's got the big picture in his head. He's amazing at that, obviously.
Yeah.
That's why he can throw around billions of missiles and keep track of everyone.
Everyone.
So, and then he'll come back to you a couple days later and say, I see your point, and maybe this is how I could deal with that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it is like anything else. It depends on who you're dealing with and what the work is and
Yeah.
all the rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it varies greatly. But the answer is, big authors, and this is even true at other houses, they actually appreciate getting meaningful feedback. But again, it also mileage may vary. You're bringing personalities with strong opinions together, and
Right.
things can get interesting.
Right, and the ultimate answer is it's the author's book, right? We're going to make
Names on it.
suggestions, but it's always going to be
Always.
what the author's vision for the book is,
Exactly.
and his career or her series or what have you. So yeah.
From Maria on Facebook, what do you prefer to publish? Trilogy storylines that wrap up with a final book, open-ended series that can continue indefinitely, or one-offs?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
definitely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah. We like it's what the story demands, right?
Exactly.
Does the story wrap up in a one-off book? That's fine. You know, is it a great, satisfying, wonderful story? Jim Hogan really specialized in those. Paths to Otherwhere still sticks with me as an incredible one-off book. It was about the multiverse, very early multiverse book. You know, some people write in series. David Weber, I'm looking at you, right? But he also has done the occasional one-off book. He's done shorter series as well.
Haven't they all become at least short series?
Well,
There's
the joke about the Baen trilogy, right, which is 5 books. And John
coming
Ringo,
early
right.
next year, Tower of Silence, book 4 or 5 in the trilogy of the Forgotten Saga of the Forgotten
Right,
World.
I think Ringo was probably the first
Yeah,
to specialize in the Baen trilogy there.
Yes.
But it really is, I think, what the story demands. And at Baen, we're flexible enough to recognize that, right? We're not going to force.
And it's going to change the certain commercial potential stuff like that, but that doesn't actually matter. I mean, obviously, we want everyone to be a bestseller, and we want every book to sell millions of copies. It is what it is. The book, whatever's in greatest service to the book and what the author's vision for the book is.
Yeah.
And whether that makes series, whether that makes standalone, whether that makes trilogy, it all depends. And then that affects what you do with it.
Right.
But it isn't the formative, that's what we want per se.
Right.
Although we always want New York Times best-selling series.
Absolutely, yes.
From Jessica on Twitter. I know Baen sells books on their websites, not published by Baen.
Yes.
How does that work? Is that something another publisher or indie author could approach Baen about?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Editors got to insert a little caret and an E. We sell other people's ebooks on our website.
Yes,
to be clear.
yes. Yeah. This is ebooks only, not paper books. Our paper books are distributed by Simon and Schuster, and we don't do other people's paper books at all.
We don't sell paper books at all.
We Baen don't sell paper books at our website either. We will refer you to lovely booksellers, but we will not.
And partner with them at cons and things like that.
Yeah. But what we are looking for, and we're not actively seeking necessarily more material there, but if we find another publisher whose books that we think will appeal to our audience or will complement our line, then yeah.
And even individual authors, although
Yes.
it's going to be a question of they have a big enough body of work, we know what their stuff is, and we understand, or at least have an inkling that his audience, her audience, whatever, matches what, or would potentially fill a niche or whatever with our audience. It's got to resonate and make sense for us.
Right. So
And it does, although the third party stuff we sell is perhaps a broader
broader.
editorial vision than we do, but still it can't violate our vision.
right, exactly,
So that's why you're not reading porn on the Baen website.
and hopefully never will. Yeah.
Now we have a bunch of questions that are trying to get a peek behind our submissions process.
Okay.
First, from Teague Summerlin on Twitter. How much is word count a make or break deal for debut authors? What about debut authors presenting series versus standalone with potential?
We do have a word count guideline on our submission guidelines, and the answer is, we're not going to take novellas. We want a full novel, which is going to be in this day and age defined, I think, as 90,000 words up. We're not going to want something.
If your novel's at 80,000 and completed, wonderful. We're not going to throw you out of bed for eating crackers, as long as the story holds up. But it really is because, and if you look in the market, you'll see that something that short isn't going to sell.
Yeah, it's very hard to,
especially in what we do.
Yes, when you start for a first novel, especially if you start getting over 150,000 words, it's like, oh, really? Do we? It's very so. Why make it hard for us to buy your book, right? So as opposed to series, as opposed to standalones,
with serious potential.
Again, if you don't get that reader a satisfying experience, the sense of completeness in that first book.
That first book has to have beginning, middle, end.
There is no series, right? There is no series in the marketplace.
And it doesn't mean it. Although, actually, the phrase you use in quotes, standalone with serious potential is the magic words. Yes, that's what you want. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that is, in a sense, what you want. It doesn't mean that, hey, this is intended as a series. And it's obvious there's a 1,000 other things that are going to happen. That's fine.
More stories
as long as
told.
we've got our arc and there's other things that need to be done.
It really needs to be a complete story.
And also taking a step back for all you writers out there, from
Yeah.
the guy who's been at other houses and stuff. Other publishers, given the cost of putting out a bigger book, thicker book, bigger investment, trying to higher price point, all the things which could potentially be a barrier to a new writer, a really long book is going to be a lot less likely to be picked up at other publishers, which there's plenty of exceptions to the rule as well. Baen is a lot more forgiving in that sense, in that if we're interested in a book and it's in the service to the length of the book, as long as it's long enough for us to want to publish it, but then again, you'd be surprised how we can help you cut something down if it's 200,000 words and say, this is all great, but here's where all the flab is, and it's really nice world building, but it's nothing about the plot, nothing about the characters.
Right, but
figure out other place to put it in future
See, the
books.
thing is, it's so much more likely that we're going to buy it if you've already cut the flab out.
Yeah,
right.
there's that too.
Right. Again,
Exactly.
you don't want to leave that to us. Well, I wrote 200,000 words. You
Right.
can cut out whatever
Figure
50 you want.
and you figure out if it's a trilogy. No, right.
And
Put your best foot forward. It's being a pro.
Right, and I will say Insurrection by David Weber and Steve White, the first David Weber book that we got, went through, I believe, 3 iterations of cutting down and expanding and cutting down and expanding.
And the only reason that Weber
down.
guy made the cut is because Steve White was attached to it, and we'd been working with Steve.
That's actually not true. That's not true.
I wasn't there at the time. I'm cracking. I am the comic relief.
Well, yes, yeah, as well as
Not the joke, the comic relief.
as well as the eye
not the
candy.
joke.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's why I got to get funnier and funnier. I'm not the eye candy. That's why.
All right, moving on.
From Kip Slaybaugh on Facebook. What is the most original approach to a submission you've ever seen?
No,
And
Stop.
no. We don't want.
Stop.
No. You don't want an original. You want no. We don't want to see original approaches to submission. Please don't do that. No.
That's giving us an excuse for no.
It is.
And tying into the length issue too. I mean, submission guidelines are out there, not just ours, but anywhere you're
Everybody.
submitting. If you violate them, you're giving us an excuse. Doesn't mean you're going to get a no, but you're already giving us an excuse, and you
Yeah.
don't want to give us an excuse.
You don't. So no.
Yeah, don't get cute.
The system exists.
Keep it straight. It's
Yes.
because what we're I go to conventions, writers' conferences sometimes, and like, well, why don't you take pitch sessions? Like, is it fantasy or science fiction with heroes I can root for? That's all. If you can pitch me something to make me want to buy it, I'm going to hire you to do radio spots. But can you write is what matters. So, unique, special, how do I make myself stand out? Be a really good storyteller. Have a good writing style.
There you
Don't
go.
have a bunch of errors on the first page of your book.
Yeah. There
That's
you go.
how you stand out.
Right. You don't want
Don't
you don't want original in your approach.
Hey, just because all these editors are old gray hairs, and I'm going to have something jump out of the box at him, and he drops over dead.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying I'm heart conditioned, but no, don't get cute.
Don't get cute. Don't be original there. Yeah.
Right, be original in voice. Well,
Yeah. Next one.
From Nicholas Steers on Facebook. This one's kind of directed toward our Slush Master General. Of all the Slush manuscripts that make it past grade for further review, how often do they become Baen titles?
All right. So the answer is not very often. Maybe 1 or 2 a year. This is the latest one that has made it out of the slush pile. Michael Merceau's The Deep Man, which is a lovely sort of Dorsai, reminded me of the Dorsai, Gordon Dixon's Dorsai, far future military science fiction. And we are publishing his second novel, the sequel to this, the year after. So the answer is we get a lot of submissions from the slush pile. Only a teeny tiny percentage of them are recommended to the senior editors, and only a teeny tiny percentage of those get bought. It's better than a lottery ticket.
yeah, right.
Yep.
But it's much better than a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Not better than a bar raffle ticket, though, probably.
No, I wouldn't say so. Yeah.
And
So
the
but-
answer
but-
is not often enough, but we're working on it. We try.
Right. But it does happen for
Yep,
sure.
absolutely.
Yep.
From Mincho Krastev on Facebook. How can I ensure you'll at least read the first page of my manuscript?
Well, again, right. Follow the procedures. Follow the guidelines. Don't
Spell
make the
my
mistake.
name right. Spell
Yes.
a company name right. I know you're sending it to 20 different places, but I am not Patrick Nielsen Hayden at Baen Books.
No.
nor is Patrick me at Tor.
Right.
It's,
So
get,
yeah.
you know, and I know it's sounding obvious, but it really is. And get the fresh eyes on it, and you know, don't give us the excuse. Hope in our heart, no in our pen. Don't get us to the pen. Keep
Yeah,
us
but
involved.
but if you do all that, we're going to take a look at that first page. We absolutely will.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
From Chris DeBow on MeWe. Looking at a submission from a new author, how much weight is on quality of the work, and how much weight is on this has ninja cat girls and dragons, and that's really popular right now?
Almost none.
On the latter.
Almost none to that last one.
It's
yeah.
all about the first.
It is all about the quality. Yeah, I mean, obviously we love Ninja Cat Girls and Dragons. Who doesn't? I mean, but for many reasons, we don't chase trends. We don't.
I prefer Ninja Cat Dragons,
Yes.
not Ninja Cat Girls.
Right.
Just to be no, Tony's. It's all about the quality of the
It's all-
writing,
yeah.
and it's about the authorial voice.
Yeah.
And you know
Yeah.
that's an ephemeral thing I'm saying, but it is not. As a reader, you should understand what voice means.
And the thing is that, and this is Baen, right? We are not publishing to genre other than the greater genre of science fiction and fantasy. We publish quality stories,
Yes.
and that can be almost any subgenre in fantasy and science fiction. So it's a different approach than a lot of indie publishers. It's it's a different approach from very specific trad.
But even in then, you'll find that there are certain. A lot of this comes down to editorial taste. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a reason we're seeing more fantasy from Baen these days. Jim and Tony weren't the biggest fantasy fans, and Jim Baen, and
Well, no, I mean I think we were, but we weren't
we're seeing the kind you
we-
wanted.
Right.
Right.
I mean, you know, we had the Dita Paxtonarian.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's
in
true.
the late 80s.
Absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
the kind of submissions that we wanted to see
Yeah,
just
right.
weren't
the People's
there.
D&D campaigns.
Right? Exactly. Right? We were seeing.
Yeah, I saw those
Yeah.
too.
Yes, of course you did. Right. So
In fact,
I think we're,
the very first thing I saw from Jim Butcher was his D&D. Jim, I'm talking to you. I'm sure you're not watching. And it's never been published. I was right to reject that. Back in the early 90s.
That actually goes to another question. Are there ever manuscripts or authors that you wished you hadn't rejected?
There are absolutely I rejected Jim Butcher's first novel. It's still not in print. I rejected Brandon Sanderson's first novel. It's still not in print.
Right.
Only because I think he made sure Joshua didn't get to keep it. No, Joshua wouldn't put it out there because he wouldn't want his agent.
Yeah.
So there are absolutely those that got away.
There's always one that got
And then there's the, I really enjoyed Destroyer Man by Taylor Anderson, but was the low bidder on it. Low bidder on the Aronson's
Right.
London thing, which,
Yeah.
which is, and
Yeah,
honestly,
good.
I didn't think it was going to be huge, but I knew it was good. It was good.
Yeah.
It was really good.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
that happens.
So it
Nature
does.
of the beast.
It does. Yeah. All right. Next question.
How about you, though?
Oh, yeah, no, I have my regrets. I won't specify, but I do.
That's why she's in charge.
I do, yeah.
I'd put on the spot, but not you.
From Scott Oden on Twitter, what would you love to publish at Baen that no one has ever sent?
Well, we were talking about, these things come in waves, right? We weren't seeing great epic fantasy for a while, but now we are in Sword and Sorcery. And so that's why. It's not that we weren't looking for it, we weren't open to it, it's just that we weren't finding it. For a while there was a dearth, I never get that right, of really good hard science fiction, but we've actually worked to develop more hard science fiction from working scientists. So Dan Cobalt and Les Johnson and Rob Hampson are all now, but we're starting to see the result of that coming out. So stuff that the stuff that no one has ever sent us. I have always liked the work of Theodore Sturgeon.
Oh, yeah.
And he just may be so unique that there is no, heir to Theodore Sturgeon.
And I don't know if those North Atlantic Press editions are still out there, but you should get them. Theodore Sturgeon, tell you, was amazing.
Yeah. So.
Although they published everything, and he wrote a lot.
not
And
all of
you
it was
see the
great.
journey of his writing.
Yeah,
Yes, get to the middle volumes.
Yeah, there we go. So I don't know. I mean, it's more that we're open to things rather than we're searching for specific things. So.
From
I
Chucky.
wouldn't mind publishing the next Holy Bible that as the best-selling work in the history of time. That's what I'm looking for.
That would be super awesome.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. We'd have to put in another another label. I think.
Right.
Another,
Exactly.
I'm not sure the dragon would.
Baen's Bible? No, maybe not. We could get in trouble for that.
We could. Well, we're
We're
not
going to
going.
cut this. You never get to see this.
Yeah. All right. Wait. Let's.
From Chucky Clark on
Yes.
Facebook.
Yes.
How does Baen see the current state of horror in their portfolio? Are they looking to expand, reduce, or otherwise change it? And is Baen open for horror so long as it's a thread in otherwise fantasy or sci-fi stories?
I think more that last. Jim Baen and I, neither of us were big horror readers, so it's not an area of expertise for us. None of our editors are here. So it's sure dark fantasy,
Right.
sort of Lovecraftian, existentials. Well, Servants of War, I think, is more grimdark
than horror.
rather than horror necessarily. And we do
Grim noir gets to horror, but it doesn't read that way initially.
It's a different end point, right?
Right.
It's a different feeling,
And it's a
in the
different
reader.
focus. It's horror elements.
Yeah.
See, the big thing is taking that big picture step back.
Yeah.
Horror is probably the strongest of fantasy, science fiction, horror for short fiction.
Mm.
Because all bets are off, anybody could die, what the hell's going to happen?
Right.
Then science fiction, because, hey, just an idea, and it's not an idea big enough to carry a whole story. I mean, a whole novel. And then fantasy in terms of it. But whereas it's kind of the reverse, where fantasy, especially invented world, or rich, lots of world building, lots of things to explore, lends itself to bigger, lots of volumes versus science fiction versus horror. And I think that horror isn't as strong in novel form. And I'm not as, again, editorial taste, I'm not as big a fan of horror in general.
Yeah. So no, it's not something we're looking to expand. No.
But it is absolutely the latter. Obviously, there's plenty of things we have that have lots of horrific elements.
Yeah.
Because
To be sure.
bad shit happens to good people and they come out on top. Or at least survive. To fight again another day.
Right.
From Joshua Hill on Facebook. How often do you accept already self-published books?
Not often.
We don't. Let's say never, so that we don't get a deluge of self-published books.
All right.
Because honestly, it's already been out there, and while we've gotten past that, almost every example of it is going to be somebody who's got an established audience that's real. So if you've really built an audience, great. But what we're going to really want to do is, what's your next thing?
one, yeah.
And then maybe we'll sell those ebooks on our website of the old stuff.
Right.
Just because it's already reached an audience, therefore we're already cut down how many people we're going to reach.
Yeah. I mean, really, the only one I can think of off the top of my head is Monster Hunter International, but that was very much
except
the
where they
exception.
changed because of what's his face, Agents of the Dragon Award winner, Mark Miller.
Oh yeah.
But the book changed. Our edition was very different.
Very different.
But it was self-published first. But yes.
So
and
two, maybe.
and Larry, keep in mind, was maybe one of the last, if not the last, of the successful physical book self-pub people.
Correct.
Who isn't a self-help guru selling his own books at his own seminars.
Yes. Yeah. So it's not something we encourage. No.
But that being said, if you built an audience, great. Come to us and sell us the next thing and say, hey, and you can sell my ebooks on your website too.
Right.
And Lee
better.
and Miller started out by, we picked up their backlist as ebooks and said, holy crap, these are really selling till you have new ones.
Yeah.
But that wasn't a self-pub thing, that was them getting orphaned, their publisher went out of
Well, no, they
business.
did. They were starting to self-pub.
Oh yeah, that's true, right, the short fiction and stuff, but not the novels.
Yeah. No, the novel had been crowdfunded.
Oh, did? I
It
didn't
did.
know that.
Yeah. But it hadn't yet got its actual paper edition. It had just been serialized to the crowdfunding patrons.
See, that was just before my time.
Yeah. So no, it's not an approach we encourage. Yeah.
But obviously, there is talent out there in the self-published world.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just there's also a lot of other things
Right.
out there in the self-published world.
Sure.
From Yvonne Rediger on Facebook. Would you ever pick up the fourth book in an urban fantasy series or only the start of a new one? How often do you pick up series?
All right, so again, we don't like to do that. However, I just signed a contract for book 5 of a really great science fiction series, which I guess we can now talk about. Book 6 or book 5 hasn't come out yet. So book 6 and 7 actually of a really great science fiction series. So again, it's not great as an introduction.
Right.
It's not an approach
Right.
we're not going to say we never do it, but it's not the best way to do it.
And it's taking a step back and looking at it. We're, besides, of course, going off the general trade audience, etc., we have a wonderful core group of fans, as all of you watching this video are. Thank you. And if this is going to be their first introduction to it, and it's the 4th, they're going to feel like they're missing something.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it can't, but it'd be better if you got something new.
Yep.
And then we'll talk about selling the ebook backlist on our website.
Absolutely. Yeah.
From Jolie Lachance on MeWe. Have you ever, and I think this will be a yes, headhunted authors? If so, what drew you to those authors? What made you think person X, who had published Y number of books, or even a book, indie or through another trad, would belong at Baen?
Well, Lovecraft had such a beautifully shaped skull, so he was my top of my list for who I wanted to headhunt. Unfortunately, he was long deceased and gone. But
Yeah. We do like to add to the collection here at the office, but right, using the metaphorical term.
okay.
The metaphorical use of headhunt. So, are there people who we think are naturally Baen authors who ought to be better published by Baen? Yes, we do. Jim Hogan, right? Case in point, started his career out at Del Rey and then sort of bounced around a little bit, but he was a Baen author and he needed to be published here, and he was.
Heinlein's backlist.
Heinlein's backlist, right? Absolutely.
Tony's been hunting that her whole career. Anytime she can get her hands on it, yes, sir.
Absolutely, right. So there are, we think, Baenish books and Baenish authors, and what we do is we let these authors know, hey, we love your work. If you ever have a novel, please let us take a look. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, and it really comes down to obviously I've got a lot of relationship with a lot of authors at previous publishing houses.
Yeah.
Kismet, Catherine Asaro got here to Baen before I did, but I got a chance to renew that acquaintance. David Coe, others like that.
Yeah.
But in the end, I want what's best for them too. And if their publisher's treating them right and they're doing well, then go with God. And then I'm like, and if they aren't, let me know.
Right.
Because I want what's best for their careers too. And if they have a backlist with another publisher who's still backing them, then they're probably better off being there. That being said, we have people who write certain kinds of fiction for us.
Right.
We had Dave Drake, who was writing fantasy for somebody else, but writing science fiction for us, and things like that too.
Right. That can work.
And of course, it's always all of the above, for the answer to that.
Yeah.
From Nick Steverson on Facebook. When reading a submission, what makes a bigger impact on you? Someone who is obviously a great storyteller but needs editorial help, or somebody who's a very clean writer who needs no editing but the story needs help? Of the two, which do you prefer to work with?
The first, absolutely.
Always.
Absolutely the first.
You can help somebody become a better storyteller with a few, but it's tricks and jujus. You can teach somebody grammar and storytelling and style. Not storytelling. Storytellers are natural born. You can help somebody with a lot of work figure out what muscles are needed by a storyteller, but you can't make a storyteller.
No.
You can't. Not from scratch. That's why, saved me from the person who's been an English professor 30 years. No, don't get me wrong. Maybe they could be a great storyteller too, but odds are they've spent way too much time in their life worrying about undergraduate grammar to be a slave to it. And story's going to suffer as a result.
Right. Every single time we're going to go for the raw but punchy story over the smooth but
Right.
Every time. Obviously, we want both.
Both.
Right.
We strive for both.
We strive for both, and we often get that.
Yeah.
But
again, we don't approach a manuscript to edit grammar. We approach a manuscript looking for story, for character, for world, and
Right.
all of the above.
All
Actually,
of the above.
it's
So
those three.
the one thing that and you want to avoid in your submission is what we touched on this before is, well, it's, I know it needs work, but that's your job, right? And almost 100% of the time you're wrong, okay? Your job is to put your story in its best foot forward. So don't give me something that you know is not satisfactory. Make it the best you absolutely can.
Or you follow the other Baen model and say, you know who'd be really good at helping this young writer? Eric Flint. Now, unfortunately, that's no longer an option, but we've often paired experienced. Eric was an author we paired with more experienced writers in the day.
Yeah, but that's not for this kind of
No,
not on that level.
No.
It's more, all right. How
yeah, right.
do
What's
New
coming
York
into our
Times-
trends, but
Right,
with
yeah.
what you're saying in terms of
Yeah.
developmental editing
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
No. If you know it's wrong, don't send it in.
Yeah, right.
Don't send
Absolutely.
it in. Make it to the point where you're happy with it.
And obviously the nuts and bolts level. If you've got somebody you can trust to look at grammar, great, because we want good story, but you should put your best foot forward. If it's you should review and clean up your manuscript. Even better, start writing the next thing and then come back to your manuscript so you're fresh, because you'll see all the little crap then. Because if you just keep revising and revising, you're going to miss the same thing again and again and again.
So yeah, all right.
From Tim Pierce on Facebook. What do you look for when considering a book to potentially review to publish? What makes that initial submission stand out as, yep, that's one on the pile I'm going to read further into and see if it's worthy?
Well, it's a page turnability, right?
Yeah, right.
It's that je ne sais quoi, right? There's no one thing, right? We've published a huge range from Mercedes Lackey to Lois Bujold to Elizabeth Moon to Michael Merceau, Tim Powers to Travis Taylor. I mean, there's the only shared element that these stories have is that they're all great stories, right? So there's many different ways to get to great story, and it's all about, do I have to keep turning the page? Am I so engaged? Sometimes it's I love these characters. Sometimes it's like, wow, I can't believe what he's done with this. The future is going to be awesome, right? James Cambias. Jim Cambias does that. Or just it can be any number of science fiction or fantasy things that
Or
happen.
I want me a pet dragon just like that.
Absolutely, Dan Coble. Yeah. Yes. Just,
Yeah.
Is it cool? Is it fun? Do I want to get to the end? Do I want to be with these characters? Or do I hate this bastard so much that I have to see what happens to him? Right?
Yeah, right.
But then you got to bring it home. You got to bring it home. You got to have that great ending. And a lot of things that we reject, especially that I reject, right? That make it far
They
to
don't
me.
deliver.
That just the ending is not satisfying.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, in the New York City-based editor parlance, it's the, you're reading something and it's your stop and you don't want to get off the train, don't want to get off the subway. It's but I want to keep reading. I don't want to, and any number of things can be bringing that forth. Whatever, all the various elements of storytelling being brought to bear, whichever one's the strongest in that particular work. In the end, it's the what makes me want to turn to the next page.
Right, and then there's no magic formula. Yeah. There's no prescription. Yeah.
There is, but for only $1,273.99, email me at imlying@baen.com.
Right. Okay, that's not true. All right, moving on.
Now we have a few questions about upcoming books in our back catalog.
Yes.
From Christopher Rowe on Twitter. Baen seems to have noticed the rising tide of sword and sorcery, evidenced by writers like Howard Andrew Jones. Really looking forward to Hanavar. Do you have plans for projects that would develop new writers in this subgenre?
And again, all right. So Sean.
Hi, Chris.
And Sean, who is running the camera and selecting the questions here, is a huge sword and sorcery fan. Right. I don't think that he put in these under pseudonyms, but okay.
Well, I appreciate it since I just saw Chris and his lovely wife Gwenda down at World Fantasy in New Orleans. Hi, Chris, if you're out there.
So the answer is we were always open to sword and sorcery, and so the fact that we're getting great works like Howard Andrew Jones' Chronicles of Hanover, it makes us very happy.
It seems like Sword and Sorcery is having a moment, and very happy about that.
Yeah.
Much happier about that than when horror was having a moment, because I'm a much bigger fan of Sword and Sorcery.
There we go. And we don't publish horror. So,
Right.
so are we looking specifically to develop new things? No, we're not.
But we're hopeful always. But that's not actually new. We've been hoping for good Sword and Sorcery, since the first time we read Conan.
It absolutely.
Actually, for me, it was Fatford and the Grey Mouser, but Conan resonates with more people.
Well, both.
Yes,
Yeah,
but-
yeah, absolutely both. Yeah, yep.
Speaking of Conan and Farfad, from Rogues in the House podcast on Facebook, we're thrilled to hear Baen Books publishing Sword and Sorcery, and it's been a blast interviewing your authors.
Oh, great, thank you.
Thanks.
What are some of your favorite classic stories in the subgenre, and how do we ask about reprints of older titles? Hashtag Kane at Baen.
Oh my God, you developed a hashtag, haven't you?
Nope.
I blame Sean entirely. All right, so yes.
So that one in the wild.
All right, so the Carla Edward Wagner
You
books.
didn't tell me he was putting us in the barrel so we could take a shot at it.
Right. So the Carl Edward Wagner books we did publish back in the day with some really great covers too, I have to say. And they sank like a stone. There was not a large audience for Kane. He is, it's very grimdark, right? This is it's pre-grimdark, but the Kane series in particular, and that's not really Baen's thing, right? So I think there is a market for Kane, but I think it's probably a small press market. And I wish whoever
I don't
whoever
know. Is
does
it
those.
Nightshade who may have them still,
I
but
don't
they're
remember.
owned by Skyhorse, and I have no idea what happened.
Right.
I know that Jeremy had gotten them, but that was 15 years ago.
So, obviously Robert E. Howard was one that were certainly formative for us.
Fritz.
Fritz Leiber, Fatford and the Grey Mouser, and
What's the other ones?
well, Jim Baen developed, of course, Thieves' World at Ace back. Sort of had that revival of Sword and Sorcery at that point. But I think. Actually, Andy Offutt, his Cormac pastiches, I think were better than the original Howard. Right?
Right.
Not as poetic and beautiful.
My favorite Conan novel is Poul Anderson's Conan the Rebel, but
right there we go. So, yes, some of the Poul Anderson Sword and Sorcery fantasies as well. Those are also great and worth taking a look at.
and some of the Elric I'd consider Sword and Sorcery.
Yeah, for sure. But again, a darker
sort
sort of
before it got too dark.
so not really Bane stuff, but definitely formative in our conception of what Sword and Sorcery is and should be. Yeah.
So, skipping past a few other Kane people, we have Xena Lowe on Facebook asking about Bujold. Specifically, is there any possibility of re-releasing older Bujold omnibus editions of the Vorkosigan novels? Like the Young Miles collection. It would be wonderful if we could get some less beat-up copies on my shelves.
Well, this is sort of a publishing cycle kind of thing. The original novels came out, and then in the 80s, and then throughout the 90s, Lois was adding to the Miles Vorkosigan series, and then another way at that point in time in publishing to bring the books back to bookstores was to turn them into omnibuses. And that was a reader-friendly way to get them. As the ebook revolution took over, it made more economic sense to split them out. So you probably won't see the omnibuses in paper again, but we absolutely do try to keep all of the books in print, in paper, in one form or another.
I mean, and that really is the rising tide of technology and costs that change that. Omnibuy editions, in the 80s into the 90s, even the early aughts, before paper costs, gas costs, everything else, putting 3 of those together was cheaper than 3 mass market paperbacks, and was a way to get those 3 books. And having someone who's done and been around companies that have done, I've pushed Omnibuy everywhere I've gone, and including here when I first got here, back when it still made sense. And 3 book omnibuy work, 2 books don't, and it's because of that price point. I mean, and it's a very broad generalization, but it's a question of length. And once you're doing those omnibuy, those are big, fat, thick books. They need a lot of paper. They need a lot of glue. They need more shelf space, and it's old backlist for these for shrinking number of physical stores.
Yeah.
And so economically, it's tough to make those work as much as we all love them.
Now, if you're looking to add to your Lois Bujold ebook collection, we have them on sale this month.
And tell all your friends.
Tell all your friends, for sure. Yeah.
Hashtag buy more Bujold.
Buy more Bujold, yeah.
From Kurt Phillips on Facebook. Why are we seeing so much more fantasy on bookstore shelves as opposed to science fiction? With the exception of Baen, which I'll note is great in military science fiction subgenre and leads the way, much of general sci-fi also seems to have a strong fantasy element. Do you agree with that view, and why do you think that is?
Why don't you take that?
Historically, it's always been the case. It's interesting in that you even go back to the pulps, and you've got the stuff that... So, I don't know, this is I could talk about this for a long time, actually, and I have at conventions. But the real key here is, we all got to blame Tolkien. Tolkien and Ballantyne bringing fantasy to the forefront and introducing it as a huge best-selling genre, and the biggest of fantasy outsells the biggest of science fiction ever since then. Before that wasn't true. And so this isn't actually anything new, it's just a byproduct of it. And I think part of that is accessibility, in that anybody can pick up a fantasy novel and be carried along. Science fiction readers or people who are looking for ideas more than just escapist fare. It's not entirely true, but I do think that's why you see more, bigger fans. You have a lot more fans of space opera or military SF because they're more touchstones that reach to people and touch them versus hard SF. I love hard SF. Some hard SF sells well, but in general, it doesn't sell nearly as well as space opera or military SF. And in large part due to Tony and Baen before I was here, and Dave Drake keeping military SF alive for us for a number of years when nobody said you can't publish it anymore, the whole post-Vietnam reaction or whatever it was. So, cyclically speaking, it's just a matter of there's a bigger audience for fantasy. It really is.
And I think these are right general terms, right?
Yeah,
I think potentially the right hard science fiction novel can get to the top of the New York Times bestseller.
But it's got to deliver on story and everything else.
Yeah, it has to give everything else. One thing I just wanted to point out was Dabari Snake Launcher, right? Joel Presby, hard SF. Does it have a fantasy element to it? Only if you want it to, right?
And that's we're living in a brave new age where science fiction is taking over the world. Ever since The Matrix sold hard SF to a mainstream audience, that we're just a battery, that anyone can grok that now, has really raised the bar for us to be able to be in a lot more places, and through Comic-Cons, through big pop culture, we're out there more. And even 15, 20 years ago, you see more genre stuff creeping into mainstream literature. There's a lot of literary stuff that has fantastical elements, etc.
Right.
It used to be only Joyce Carol Oates and Margaret Atwood, but long since then with Lethem, etc., Link, Ted Chiang, who actually is in genre but more literary, etc., So it's out there, it's big, broad, and be happy. Celebrate it all.
Yeah.
And buy more Baen books.
And buy more Baen, yeah.
Now we have a few questions about the late, great Eric Flint. First, from James Hayes on Facebook, what is the future of Flint's 1632 and Grantville series?
Well, the answer is that Eric was a hard worker up to the moment of his death, and he loved to work with collaborators. So he had under contract a number of 1632 novels that were fairly along in production with different collaborators. The first one just came out earlier this year with Robert Waters, The Transylvanian Decision. And we already have delivered the book that he was writing on the Russia sequence with Paula Goodlett and Gorg Huff that was very long in its development. He's got one with Chuck Gannon and Jody Lynn Nye and Griffin Barber. Yeah. So all of those are coming out, and we're going to see his vision for what was going on in those different areas of the universe. There were other people that he was working with as well, and it's all going to come down to what is the market for these books. Yeah. If the audience continues to be there for these books, then we will continue the series according to the lines that Eric laid out, yeah. And working with his literary executor. And if they don't, well, simple as that. Yeah.
But there's several years of Eric work
Absolutely.
Still to come.
Yes.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
From Steve Timberlake on Facebook. Is there any plans for the assets of Ring of Fire Press or a separate to create a separate division for them? Will some of the Grantville Gazette backlists be available again?
That is a legal question that's caught up in the disposition of Eric's estate. So we don't actually have the answer for much of that. Some of the Ring of Fire Press books and authors will become available, we hope, in the coming year at Baen.com. But we're not. We don't have that finalized yet.
Magic 8 Ball says, ask again later.
Yeah.
We hope to have an answer for you, but
yeah.
we don't know yet.
Yeah.
From Max Sargent on Facebook. What is your favorite memory of Eric Flint?
All right. Do you want to handle that one?
Well, I'll do mine, I
Okay,
guess.
yeah.
It's honestly my first memory of Eric Flint. I showed up for a convention called Context in Columbus, Ohio. It was Ohio. I'm pretty sure it was Columbus. And it was my very first guest of honor gig. I was working for Tor at the time, and I walked into the hotel bar, and there was one other person there, Eric Flint. We didn't even have a bartender at the time. And sat down, introduced myself, was delighted to discover that this guy who looked like, he was just having a drink after work was actually the fellow guest of honor instead. And we struck up a conversation, and a bartender finally showed up, and Eric started drinking his O'Douls, and 5 hours later, we'd had dinner at the bar and had seen nobody else walk into the bar at this hotel the con was at, which was very strange, but also delightful. I mean, we chatted about everything. I mean, the first 2 hours was Eric grilling me about how publishing worked. Then we got into questions about life, liberty, pursuit of politics, and it was a great night.
Yeah. My favorite Eric moment is actually a Jim Baen story too. So I wasn't present for this, but Eric loved to tell this story. Is that he came to our offices and was visiting with the team here, and Jim Baen took him out to dinner, as you do. And he took him. He wanted to really impress Eric, so he took him to this really high-end steakhouse, and wanted to just really do it up right for Eric. So Jim orders big fancy steak and glass of wine, and then Eric orders the meatloaf, and Jim is like, why are you disrespecting me like this? You should order the steak. Have the surf and turf. Come on, man. And Eric is like, but I just want the meatloaf. Right? It's not that he was against steak. It's just that at that moment he wanted the meatloaf. But
to thine
Jim,
own self be true.
But Jim wanted to do it upright. But for Eric at that moment, doing it upright was the meatloaf. So.
There's so many elements of Eric wrapped up in that story.
Yeah, there really are. He was a delightful.
He was never his way or the highway, but it was his way. He's going to accept it on his dirt.
He was a delightful man. He could talk to anybody. He and his wife Lou were just wonderful people, and great to work with. Now, he could push a deadline like no other.
Worst thing in the world that ever happened was when our production manager, several production managers ago, told him the real actual deadline on books. There's a reason why we never tell authors that, because life happens and we want to have the margin.
Luckily, our current production editor knows better. But having gone through,
It's like Scotty saying to Jordy, "What do you mean you'll actually fix it in 4 hours? How are you ever going to get a reputation as a miracle worker if you tell them the real deadline?"
Exactly. So Eric would push a deadline, but he turned in manuscripts that were very, very
Yeah,
clean.
that's true. His own were always clean, and that was, and with his collaborations, you knew several eyes had been on it as well.
Yes. So we do not encourage that. That was an Eric only thing. So.
Yes.
And I guess we'll wrap things up with a couple fun questions. From Theo Hodges on Twitter. Have you bought yourself a book for your birthday or the upcoming holiday? If so, which one? And if that doesn't apply, what's the book you're looking forward to reading for fun next?
Okay. I actually bought myself a book for the first time literally in years at World Fantasy, and it was the newest book from Peter Watts, wonderful, brilliant, infuriating writer. I had the absolute pleasure working on Peter's first novel, Starfish, back in the 90s as David Hartwell's assistant. And he's his novel Blindside, he's a great writer. And it was it Tachyon? No, Fairwood? One of the Pacific Northwest presses had done his newest novel. And he only had one copy, and I was like, I'll come back later, knowing I would come back later. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to buy it. Once my wife yells at me, because, we have over 100 boxes of books in the garage, along with dozen plus bookshelves that are full in the house, so I'm not supposed to buy books.
All right, I'm going to tell you that for the first time in, I guess, since college, I had unpacked all of my books. 3 months later, we had a house fire. Okay, the books were fine. My books were fine. But we lost some children's books. And everybody was fine. But I'm just saying, leave one box unpacked. Just leave them in the box. Don't tempt fate.
Right. Don't tempt
Don't tempt fate.
Right, exactly.
That's why there are fantasy elements in hard science fiction. Okay, this is how people really work.
Superstitious magic. That is IT. Do we know why that fixed computer? No, but it does. So do that.
Somebody knows. I read mysteries for fun. So I will buy myself mysteries. Alexander McCall Smith and Donna Leone, her Venice series. Those are ones that I will usually get myself for Christmas.
I buy other people's books all the time myself.
Yeah. And of course, I acquire books for Baen, and really those are presents to myself too. So.
Yeah, and what I have on my e-reader, if it's not Baen backlist, it's Kipling, it's Lord of the Rings, the whole big fat volume, which I'm reading to my son.
Oh, fun! Yeah.
And last, very important question from James Lick on Facebook: what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
You go first.
Is it 125? No, wait. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have no idea.
Now, I work in our subsidiary rights and worry about licensing, and since you're asking something for somebody else's intellectual property, the only answer I can give to that is it depends on how fast the plane is that I'm flying in when I do an unladen swallow.
Oh.
You're welcome. Somebody had to throw in a bad pun.
There it is.
And I guess while we have all
and
of our...
I'll never be back here again.
For all of our viewers, readers, and fans, any last messages you'd like to give them?
No, just happy holidays. Books make great presents. Yeah.
Hashtag buy more Baen.
Hashtag buy more Baen.